Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for letting me come and share today, and thank you to everyone at Yellow Conference for being so wonderful and accommodating. I also see a few ladies from Charity Water here, so hi. All right, so I want to start with a question. How many of you here have started a business or want to, at some point in your life, start a business? I'm in the right place. Awesome. So I have spent the majority of my adult life thinking about branding, and I have had the privilege to create a brand called Charity Water and also now help some brands kind of form in an early stage. And I love talking about branding, and I also recognize that you cannot start a business in today's world without at least thinking about what your brand is going to say to the world. What do you want your message to be? How do you want to say it? And whether that's a business or your personal brand, whether you're a coach or some kind of a teacher. So my relationship with branding, however, has not always been rosy because all of our careers have ups and downs. So I want to take you back to when I was 23 years old. I'm going to grab my little clicker, hope it works. Hope it works. Oh, sorry. Awesome, okay. So this is my talk, how to build a brand with meaning. So at 23 years old, I was offered a job at a small design boutique house called Superfad, and this was our logo. It was a bunny with a carrot hanging in front of it, forever out of reach. And my job as a very young graphic designer was to take part in building the most amazing advertising campaigns, commercials that I had watched when I was a little teenager on TV, commercials for Coke and Honda and American Express, thinking one day I will be able to be a part of making this. And our slogan at our company was create desire. I saw nothing wrong with that at 23. And I actually dropped out of college, out of junior year. My boss convinced me that I would learn more on the job than I would in a classroom. So while all of my friends were still working on their college thesis, I got to walk the halls of White & Kennedy and Saatchi and Ogilvy and Mather, which are some of the most legendary advertising agencies in a city like New York, which is the center of marketing and advertising. So I thought I had made it. I thought that my life could not get any better. But as I sat in boardrooms and brainstorms with legendary creative directors and marketers, I listened to how they would talk about marketing and this constant theme of we must create desire for something that people didn't even know that they needed. And we must dangle this carrot in front of people that will never really make them happy. So yeah, we must create desire for a shade of lipstick, even though people might already have 12 shades of lipstick sitting in their bathroom drawers. We must create desire for the new model of this car, even though, and explain to people that this is the most important decision that you need to make today, is go buy this new car, or go buy this new lipstick, even though the car you might be driving is perfectly fine. And so, slowly, the glamour and sort of sparkle of this new job started to wear off, and as I settled into my daily work, I realized that I was incredibly unhappy, and I felt like the way that we were expected as marketers to speak to consumers was not speaking to them like a human being. It was speaking to them like a customer, and our job was to sell as much as possible. So 2 years in, I made the decision that I can't do this anymore, and I started looking for other opportunities to bring more meaning into my life. And as I was talking to a friend of mine on the corner of my block when I was living in the East Village, I was telling him sort of this feeling of sheer depression and unhappiness that I felt with a job that I thought I had always wanted. And he said, you know, first of all, I told him I was kind of looking for ways to bring meaning to my life by volunteering. So I went and volunteered at a homeless shelter. I filled out paperwork after 9/11 and helped log entries. And I did all these little random acts of kindness to make myself feel better about what my life meant in the world. And at this time, my next door neighbor said, you should meet my friend Scott Harrison. He just started, a month ago, started an organization called Charity Water. And Charity Water is going to help bring clean water to people in need around the world. And Scott was a self-proclaimed nightclub promoter turned charity founder. He had he has an incredible story on his own. He gave up everything that he owned after 10 years of getting people drunk for a living, sold all of his possessions, moved to Africa, lived there for 2 years, and realized that the water crisis is what he wanted to dedicate his entire life to. And so I met him a month in. He said, we kind of need a designer. We don't have anybody. I started coming by on nights and weekends and working until midnight every single day. We were working around his kitchen table at the time, and I not only fell in love with Charity Water, as you might have guessed by my last name, I also fell in love with him, and that was awkward for a minute because he was my boss, and I was in love with him for like a year before he knew it, and that's a completely different talk, though. Now we have 2 beautiful kids, and we spent the next decade together building Charity Water with an amazing team of about 100 employees in Tribeca. And we now work in 24 countries around the world, and we've served almost 10 million people with access to clean water. So the thing that I'm most proud of about Charity Water, though, is that the way that we chose to market and to tell our story to our donors, to our supporters, we never led with what can we say that would get people to give us the most amount of money as soon as possible. We always, at least this is how I felt every single day coming into work, I wanted to lead with connecting with a human being on the other side of that screen who was seeing some piece of content that we had created, and whether that piece of content made their day better, made them feel just a little bit more hopeful about the world, or it made them realize that they need to do more. My first and primary always aim was to create content that matters, that has meaning and adds value to people's lives. So my experience back at my sort of job at 23 years old at the advertising agency, I thought was a little bit in isolation. I thought I was too naive and too young and too idealistic, but it turns out I've been studying brand recently, and there's this fascinating study that I want to tell you about called the Meaningful Brands Study, and it's by a communications group called Havas, and they have been studying the relationship between people and brands for over 10 years. So it's an ongoing study, and they've talked to over 350,000 citizens all around the world in different countries, asking them, how do you feel about the top global brands that exist in today's world? Brands that all of you and I would see in our daily lives. We would see them on the shelves of our supermarkets. And what they have found out is that 77% of brands today would not be missed if they disappeared. If they were wiped off the face of the earth tomorrow, nobody would miss them if they were gone. I was kind of shocked at this statistic, and it keeps going up. So the number was 70 just a few years ago, and now it's 77. And we have to ask ourselves, what is happening? What are brands not getting? So I want to dive into that because I think I have something close to an answer. And before we ask what are they doing wrong, I want to sort of focus on what are the other 23% doing right. So there's 23% of brands that are meaningfully connecting with their customers that would be missed if they were gone. What are they doing right? Well, it turns out that the biggest driver of meaningfulness for brands is their content, which makes sense because one of the primary goals of a brand is to create content. Before we kind of understand what meaningful means, though, I want to tell you about the work of a man named Kendall Havens. Kendall Havens is a researcher and a storyteller, and he's been hooking people up to an fMRI machine, which scans your brain waves and kind of looks at what your brain is doing, while people hear stories and hear facts and pieces of information and absorb content in their brain. And what he discovered is that our brain is actually incapable of processing raw information unless it is able to first turn it into a story that makes sense to our human experience, to our mental model of our life, let's say. So let me give you an example. Let's say you are standing in the break room of your office and you hear 2 coworkers having a chat. One person says to the other, I haven't seen John for a couple of days. Have you seen him? I'm a little worried. And the other person goes, no, I haven't seen John, but I did see a blue Honda Civic parked in Susan's driveway yesterday. What does your brain immediately start doing? Your brain immediately starts to tell itself a story about what might be happening between John and Susan. You may not even know John or Susan. You may not even know whether John drives a blue Honda Civic. But your brain is off. It is constantly looking for opportunities to connect the dots and piece together a story. What Kendall Havens also discovered is that if your brain cannot, as hard as it tries, cannot put together a bunch of facts and form a story, it's going to throw the facts in the trash. There's no other thing your brain can do with it. It cannot keep all of these random facts in there because that burns a lot of calories, and your brain's got a lot of other things to do. So let me tell you a quick story about the Inuit. This is a tribe in the Arctic, and they have this fascinating practice where they don't yell at their children to discipline them. They don't reprimand them, they don't give them any consequences, and they don't give them a timeout. I don't know how many timeouts I've given my kids, but it is a lot. So what the Inuit do instead is they tell their children stories to prevent them from getting in harm's way. For example, it's very cold where they live, so children must wear hats outside during the winter. In order to get the kids to wear their hats, moms would tell the children a story about how if you don't wear a hat outside, the northern lights are going to come, they're going to take your head off of your body, and they will use it as a soccer ball. This is a real story that the Inuit tell their kids. When I first heard that, I was like, wait, so they not only terrify their children, they just flat out lie to them? Wow, maybe I should try that, actually. So it turns out in the context of all of this, there is a really deep and meaningful reason for why the Inuit still do this. It's because humans have been communicating through story for millennia before we invented the written word. The way that we would pass on important and useful information was through our words. And if I gave you a bunch of random pieces of information, you would barely be able to remember any of it. So stories became this fantastic tool for communicating in a significant way that would just bloop, go right back in there in the brain and make a nice little home for itself. So this is Kendall Havens' work. This is what he discovered. He said, if your brain can't make sense of information by turning it into a story, it will simply ignore it. And so I got to thinking, I wonder if this is why so many of these brands would not be missed if they were gone. Because the content that I see every single day is content my brain has no idea what to do with and simply ignores. And I want to just walk you through some of these ads that I literally pulled. It wasn't hard. It took me a few minutes. So first one is Diesel, be stupid. You'll create more. My brain honestly does not know what to do with this information. Another one is, it's another one called Be Stupid. Smart may have the brains, but stupid has the balls. I don't know if anybody here works for Diesel. I'm so sorry if I'm offending anybody, but there's more. So then you get all of the advertising that's like the corporate wars between Burger King and McDonald's or between Verizon and AT&T, and it's really awkward when you see this stuff. Like, first of all, if I'm driving on the highway and you have like 2 seconds of my attention, this is what you're going to choose to show me? It's kind of like sitting at dinner with your best friend and she's having a fight with her husband the entire time. It's really, really awkward. And so when companies do this publicly, I just don't think anybody has the time for that. This one, it's like the prize, a thing I found. Small penis, have I got a car for you? By Porsche. I also just said penis at a women's conference. We'll talk about that later. I'm sorry. But Porsche thought it would be a really great idea to try to sell their car by offending their customers first. I wonder if that worked. And then you have the classic ads that where companies just talk about themselves the whole time and think that you care. Honda awarded Best SUV Brand for 2019. Good for you, Honda. What does that have to do with me and my life? How is that going to add any meaning to my life? This one takes the cake. I have to just tell you about this one. This is a toilet paper company called Andrex in the UK, and they thought that it would be awesome to create an entire campaign asking people whether they scrunched their toilet paper before they wiped their butt, and how many of them folded it instead. And then they also went all the way and asked people what their poop is like, whether it is like a log or a can of soup. And this is what I really don't understand. The people who create this, like there is a CEO who runs this company who said, Cool, this is a great idea. This is how we communicate with our customers and add meaning to their life. It's like these people have barbecues on the weekends. They put their kids to bed. They kiss their wife or husband goodnight. And then they walk into the boardroom in the morning. They sit down at the brainstorming table. And it's just like, bonk, this is what comes out. And we are all, as customers, waiting. We are waiting for a meaningful message. We are craving messages that inspire us, that even make us laugh, or just, somehow connect with us on a human level. I forgot about this one. We've all seen these, right? Like, what the heck do you do with that except throw it in the trash? So, what I want to talk about is how do you build a brand with meaning instead of the stuff we just saw? What does it look like? So to do that, I want to offer up definition of what I believe the word brand is. I believe that your brand is a story that is always being told. Your brand is a story that is always being told. So in movies, we see stories and they come to an ending. Your brand just kind of tells a story all the time, and it becomes the narrative of how people relate to you. In order to understand what a story means, I want to tell you about the hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell has a really, really long book talking about the hero's journey, but I want to simplify this for you real quick. So every story that we know and love, like every movie, every book that we love, sort of follows this basic pattern and has these basic elements. So every good story must have a hero, a central character. The central character in the story must be faced with some kind of a challenge, or else it's not really a good story. There's always a guide that helps the character, either by giving them a tool or a piece of advice to overcome this meaningful challenge that they face. And at the end, the hero is somehow transformed. At the end of the story, the hero must be transformed, or else it's not a good story. If the person starts out and ends in the movie being the exact same person, has no change, it's not a good movie. And this is found in every single story, book, movie, everything from The Hunger Games to Moneyball to The Matrix to Jesus' Parables to the Odyssey. This is how the human brain likes to hear our stories. I want to give you a couple of examples. I have 2 little kids, and I watch Moana probably 100 times a month, so I thought this would be a good one. So in Moana, the hero is Moana. Her challenge is when she finds out that the heart of Te Fiti has been stolen, and her challenge, her call to adventure, is to restore the heart of Te Fiti, or else the earth will be in peril. Maui is her guide, and she is transformed at the end of the movie because she goes from being kind of a little sheltered girl to becoming a master wayfinder and helping her people get off this island that they've been trapped on. Same goes for the Hunger Games. Quick another example, Katniss Everdeen is the hero of Hunger Games. She volunteers as tribute instead of her sister. Haymitch, who is the Woody Harrelson character, is her guide, and when she wins the Hunger Games and goes through all of her trials, overcomes her challenge, she emerges completely transformed and different. She becomes victorious, she secures food for her entire district, and she becomes the hope of the world. So these are just a few examples of how story can be used in, how the story framework is evident in stories. But now I want to tell you about how this applies to any company that you want to build, and anytime you want to communicate meaningfully with your customers, whether it's your personal brand, a brand that you're building for someone else, whether you're on the marketing team, this is how I would go about doing it. So the biggest mistake, I'm just going to start off here, the biggest mistake companies make is they think they are the hero, and they talk about themselves like the whole story revolves around them. And then you get ads like this, which I hate to bring up Porsche again, but this one I really just feel like is a good example. Nobody is perfect, but Porsche is number 1 and number 2, number 3 and number 4. And, you look at that and just think, wow, you really think a lot about yourself. And, I mean, good for you, but I don't know what to do with this. And in fact, it kind of makes you hate Porsche a little bit. So the number one thing that you must remember is that you are never the hero as a brand. You are always the guide. And your job as you're talking about your company, as you're building your brand, is to step out of the spotlight, put your customer in that spotlight instead, turn to the customer and say, we understand what your biggest challenge is, and we have a solution for you about how we can solve it, and how, when you buy our product, the challenge that you had, you will be transformed, because you'll go from being someone who doesn't have our product to someone who does. And the more detail that you can paint that story with, how is the customer's life going to be different with your product or your course or your lesson? How is the customer's life going to be impacted in a meaningful way? The more you can explain this in as great of an amount of detail as possible, the better your brand will be. Okay, so I want to talk about a good example. I think JetBlue has a pretty awesome brand. And it's hard to talk about airline companies because everybody has a horror story, but I think it's a good example for this. JetBlue knows that their hero is the traveler, and they've identified their hero's challenge as traveling is stressful. They could have taken a completely different angle and said traveling is expensive, but then they would have built a completely different brand. So they said, we're going to stick with this one. The one we're going to speak to is travel is stressful. JetBlue, we're going to be your guide, and we're going to humanize travel and make it fun. And this is actually in JetBlue's mission, is to humanize travel. And here's another concept, right? So when you've sort of outlined your brand story, you think, well, am I supposed to keep telling the same story over and over again? No. Your job is to figure out how to tell that story from 1,000 different angles. How do I come at it from this angle? How do I speak to a different segment of the audience, but continuing to making sure that it all bubbles up to the bigger brand story that you've decided on. So I want to give you an example of how JetBlue talks to a specific segment, which is parents. They say, okay, we're going to talk to parents today. We're going to, in this piece of content, we're going to identify with their challenge, which is flying with babies is incredibly scary and stressful. I've flown with my babies, and you feel like the whole plane is just staring you down, like your kid's going to cry and cause all this trouble, and everybody's going to hate you at the end of it. So JetBlue made this beautiful ad that I want to show you. It's a 2-minute video. And we'll talk about it in a second after it's done.
It is more stressful flying with a baby. There's just a lot more to consider. There's a lot more to think about. Do I have everything ready? Am I forgetting anything? Is he going to be occupied on the airplane? I don't want to be that lady with the baby who's screaming for 4 hours.
Flight 213 is now boarding. Please proceed to gate 15.
I'm nervous because he doesn't like to sit still. I think the worst thing that could happen on this flight is that he'll get overtired, which causes a lot of screaming, and people definitely give you some dirty looks.
Can you sit down for me, please? I'm most nervous about her having a total meltdown and having everyone around us really wishing that we weren't on the plane.
For your safety, continue observing the seatbelt sign and remember that all flights.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard our very special JetBlue flight. We all know when we're flying with babies and they cry on the plane, it can be hard on all of us. This will be the very first flight where crying babies is a good thing. Every time a baby on this plane cries, you'll receive 25% off your next JetBlue flight. In other words, 4 cries is equivalent to a free round-trip ticket.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain speaking. We're going to be commencing our descent in the next few minutes. The latest weather in Long Beach right now, reporting winds out of the west.
Max did it. Let's give it up for Max, Donovan, Leela, Beck, and Reese.
thanks again to all the moms and the babies on board today for making this flight so special.
So cute, right? Oh. What I want you to notice about this is that they start not by talking about themselves, and they end not by talking about themselves. They start in a mom's bedroom. It's a really intimate setting. We get you. We know you. We understand you. And they end with you above all, which is, again, it's about you. They get this. And this is the recipe for how your brand can get there. Just figure out how to take yourself out of that spotlight, put your hero in there instead, and work your butt off trying to understand their real challenges and communicating in a real way to those challenges. So just like in stories, the bigger the transformation that happens from the beginning to the end of a movie or a book to the character, the better the story. Same goes for your brand. The bigger the transformation you can offer, not empty promises offer, but actually stand behind and deliver on, the better your brand will be. And let me tell you about a couple of brands who do this well. So Nike says, we think your challenge, people's challenge is that most people don't think they're an athlete. They say, well, if you have a body, you're an athlete, and we will inspire greatness within you. And by the way, that has very little to do with shoes, notice, right? So many brands, amazing transformation and promises that they offer have very little to do with their actual product that they make. Airbnb says, we believe that your challenge is that hotels are cold and impersonal. If you travel with Airbnb and book a house on Airbnb, we will make sure that you feel like you belong anywhere you go around the world. Belonging has very little to do with renting houses if you think about it. Sorry. Two more. Starbucks says, we know that all humans crave connection. And they say, if you open the door of any Starbucks around the world, you'll feel just a little more of a sense of community. And they happen to sell coffee. And this is Simon Sinek. I don't know, you guys some of you are thinking about this, but Simon Sinek has an amazing talk about this called Start With Why. And this is how these brands start with why. So we work, same thing. Starting a business is hard. That's a huge challenge that they've identified. But they say, not only, if you come join us, not only will we help you make a business, we'll help you make a life. And they sell office space. So a couple of parting thoughts to sort of leave you with. Number one, great brands, they don't talk to their customers like customers. Great brands all understand this, that people want to be talked to like humans. Nobody wants to be looked at with a dollar sign on their head. It's a quick example I just pulled from my inbox the other day. So the email on the left is talking to me like a customer. Hours left, 2-day deals, up to 67, which is an odd number, % off. Hurry, quantities are limited. Shop the deals. It goes right in the garbage. The one next to it is by Framebridge, and they just went a little bit deeper. They tried a little bit harder to tell a story, a small little snippet of a micro story. It says, my mom read the baby's see red first, so she always wore red to bond with me when I arrived. And that's just like a little tiny moment in my day that makes me smile, and I like that. And therefore now my brain likes Framebridge just a little bit more. Whereas on the other one, I'm like, where do I unsubscribe right now? So second parting thought is great brands understand that it is about the relationship, not about the transaction. You know, we have to earn the right to ask someone to buy our product by first building that relationship in some way, by giving your customer something that they can put in their brain and tell a story around. So the last piece of information, since we're talking about information versus story, I want to give you is that the study that I told you about in the beginning of my presentation, the Meaningful Brands study, shows that 55% of consumers believe that brands have more of an influence on our future than do governments. So a lot of people think that brands mean more in their lives than governments do on how our future will be shaped. And I have 2 little kids, like I've mentioned. Here they are, Jack and Emma. And as they get older, I know that they're going to stop listening to what mommy and daddy say to them. They're going to start listening to their friends. They're going to start listening to people they follow on social media. And they're going to start listening to brands. They're going to start listening to their favorite shoe company and their favorite, latte company. So they're going to be influenced by brands throughout their life, and they're going to see millions of pieces of advertising and marketing. And I just really wish and hope that we get our world to a place where brands are more able to communicate in a meaningful way with our children and ourselves. And I think over here in this room, you guys are part of making that happen. I hope that you will make the choice to be part of the 23% that looks for meaning in your connections with your customers and not part of that 77%. That was my talk. I am Vic Harrison, and you can find me at thebrandedstartup.com, where I geek out about this stuff, and I make YouTube videos as well, talking about most of the things I shared with you today, and you can follow me on Instagram. Thank you so much.
You can't clap at this point.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? You in the yellow. Gosh, that was a lot of people are wearing yellow. Okay.
Hi. So first off, thank you for the highly relevant and actionable advice. I feel like I actually have like action items for myself coming out of your talk. Second, do you have any plans to write a book? Because I will totally buy it.
You know, okay, so I don't, but this is like the worst self-promotion ever. There's an amazing book about this. I wanted to mention it and I forgot, by a man called Don Miller, and it's called Story Brand. Everybody needs to read this book. And part of the concepts, like the hero's journey, is kind of part of his work that he does. He talks about how brands can apply the concepts in storytelling to their marketing. Thank you for asking. Yeah, he does. He does have a good podcast. Yeah, he's great. He has like little videos he puts out all the time about this stuff. Yeah. Sorry, what? Oh, I picked the next one. I'm sorry. I picked this lady in the blue.
So for new entrepreneurs starting a company, and they're trying to really nail their brand, how much time would you recommend they spend consuming information and content on how to do that versus just trial and error creating?
I mean, I think that reading a few of these books would be amazing. And even when we were creating the Charity Water brand, for us, a long time, we spent a long time making mistakes, like years, probably 2 or 3 years, where we really were fuzzy about what our mission should sound like, what our mission should be really, and what our vision should be, and should they be switched when we didn't get it, we didn't understand. So I think learning about this is such a good time savings in the long run, because there are thousands of books written about it. Another one that I would recommend is called The Human Brand. And in that book, and I'll just tell you like real quick about what it says, and you probably don't even have to read the book, but it's, again, 2 researchers. I'm geeky about research, but they discovered that the 2 biggest characteristics of human brands are warmth and competence. So, and this goes back to how we were wired in prehistoric ages, where the human brain would look at another person or animal approaching and say, does he have ill intent towards me, or does he have good intentions towards me? And if the person showed warmth in some way, smile, hey, how are you, some kind of interaction, a desire to get to know you, then we would say, okay, you're cool. Now, let me look at your competence. How competent are you actually to deliver on that intent? And so now this is how 80% of us judge companies and brands. First, we want to see that a brand is warm, that it's that we can trust it, that it can speak the truth. And then we want to see how competent are they. And I see so many brands, like companies on their website, they look really competent. They have the right fonts and colors, but there's no warmth. And so that's a crucial step that you can't forget. Yeah. I don't know if that really answered the question, but yes, lady in the red. Lady in the red, glasses.
So what I'm curious about is a lot of the information about branding and marketing comes from corporate, and then we as social entrepreneurs utilize that information from corporate. Is there derived from like a social impact marketing that specifically comes for and by social entrepreneurs, or does it mostly flow from corporate I'm curious.
Yeah,
'cause
I
that's
know what
I've
you're
mostly
saying.
heard
So
about.
for nonprofits and
Yeah.
social good, I mean, you can look at what I'm talking about because that's where I learned all of my branding knowledge is through branding charity water. But I do think that nonprofits, they should be acting like brands because anything that's an entity of any kind, it is a brand because by definition, all a brand is the image you put in the brain of your consumer. So I think it's actually surprisingly similar, the ideas. And if you just stay away from meaningless content, which I think is the biggest mistake, like when we copy corporate branding, we copy the email that I showed you that was like 76% off, and we think, this is what everybody is doing, I should send an email like this. But nobody should do that. Nonprofits or for-profits or corporates, nobody should really be, sending meaningless communication these days because there's just too much of it already. Yeah. Yes.
So first, if you guys have not read Scott's book, that was an incredible book, super inspirational for what you're talking about. And from the book, I learned how you were focused on telling the stories of the people who didn't have clean water from the very beginning. Some of the issues that we'll tackle in some of our businesses are really hard things happening globally.
Yeah.
But you guys are able to tell those stories in a way where wasn't super depressing and super like, oh God, another charity water. I can't read it because it's so hard to see these villages and these people. How did you keep that balance of like, we want to tell you the truth about how bad this issue is, but we also don't want to depress you or guilt you into feeling like you should support us?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You definitely read the book because, thank you. So we always said we want to focus on opportunity, not guilt, and that's part of our values. So Nitya, and you guys know this, we never focus on the guilt, on guilting people into taking action because research actually shows that if you guilt people into taking action, that is effective immediately in the short term. So like the people that stand with the clipboard on the street and you're like, okay, I'll talk to you for 5 minutes. They do guilt you into it and you take action immediately, but your long-term relationship with that brand is greatly diminished because you don't want to be around somebody who's constantly negative and just don't need that as much in our world. But it is important in certain instances to show the truth, right? What is really happening, but you first have to earn that right. Again, you don't just walk up to somebody on the street who has no idea who you are and say there's 653 million people dying of dirty water around the world, right? You first invite them in and tell them the hope and the mission that you're trying to accomplish and, make them feel comfortable and like they can trust you. Then you can tell some of those more harsh statistics, I think. Yeah. Yes. Hi. Sorry. You're next.
So you obviously had the opportunity to build this beautiful and really impactful brand of charity water from the ground up. What advice do you have for those of us who are charged with transforming brands that are years, even decades old, and have built brand equity off of a framework that's not what you talked about?
Yeah. Well, obviously that has to do with what your leaders want, right? If you're working for somebody else. But I would say start from scratch and do like a brand therapy session. Start with a morning where you take a room over and print out everything that your brand, all the touch points, everything your brand produces, all of the content, put it on the walls and sort of walk people in who you want to influence and say, like now they can see it all together, which is a huge impactful moment because I've had moments where I coach brands and one-on-one I'm like, look at this email, how could we shouldn't be sending stuff like this, and they're like, yeah, but this is not a priority right now, like we're focusing on another part of the business. But when you do this huge brand audit where you show them, look at this is what our entire brand looks like, and you walk them into this big room where everything is on the walls. That's the biggest way I've found to sort of have your leaders have that aha moment of, oh shoot, like this is actually not what we want to communicate to the world. So I don't know if that's helpful, but like starting with that and then just, yeah, I think that's the question I get a lot is how do I convince my boss question, which I think is what you're asking. I think that's one of the sort of practical ways of doing it. Yeah. Hi. Yes.
Hi. I have a question about the concept of personal branding. So I'm
Which I know nothing about, by the way, but I'll try to answer.
So I'm a writer, and I'm just wondering if branding myself as a person is something that I need to do, and if so, how would I even do that?
Yeah.
If you can answer that question.
Well, I think it's a question that you have to answer. Do you want to do that or not? I just did it. I have the branded startup, which is me, Vic Harrison, talking about stuff that interests me. And I had like my friend go and take a picture of me out in Tribeca, and it was awkward. And I did all the things, and I wrote down my mission statement, my vision statement. Like, what is my vision? It's to create meaningful beauty in the world. And I wrote down my mission, which is to help creative entrepreneurs build brands that now I'm like losing my words, to help creative entrepreneurs build brands that reflect who they are deep down. So I did that, and I'm still working on it. It's really new for me, and it's awkward, right? If you guys have like, it's one thing to shine the spotlight on the company you work for, or even a brand that you've built with a couple of buddies, but it's another thing totally to be like, this is me, and I'm so polished and perfect, and look at my Instagram feed, but that's not really you. So I mean, I think it's a choice everybody has to make. Do you or don't you? And if you do, then like Jackie said, like that's where you gotta like tell the truth. Nobody has time for people's personal brands where everybody just looks perfect all the time, right? Like that's not sincere, that's not authentic. Yeah. Oh, sorry, here you go.
No. Not to pick on Porsche again, but it's an interesting conversation because Porsche, quite frankly, is target marketing. And so their ads are going after their customer base. You may not like it, it's a bit antiquated. And so if you want to start to expand, there's the fear, obviously, you're going to alienate the people who you have been successful with. How do you balance that? Because they are, if you look at every Porsche, you know who's driving it. It is target marketing.
Yeah, no, it's very true. But I still don't know that a man would want Porsche to ask if he has a small penis or not. You know, like, if you have I mean, yeah, I think that there are brands who are really funny, and they're not necessarily incredibly soulful. And that's okay if the value they're adding, like if that meaning comes from laughing a lot, okay, that's great. So not everybody has to be like touchy-feely to build a brand, I think. But I just think it's a matter of even that target market, how do you speak to them in a way that kind of says, I get you. And I didn't think that those ads said anything but, we're so great, look at us. Yeah, and now, yeah. 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 Like Gen Z, the YouTube generation. People just really want, I think that nobody really pays attention to ads that don't I think the marketing industry has been trying to grab people's attention over the decades, and no, it's slipping away, and the last resort now is like, let's everybody just shout the loudest, and let's everyone like make our logos bigger. And I think now it's definitely changing, thankfully, for the better, but that was the approach after the old approach stopped working. And so now the only, it's like you peel away the onions, like, okay, all of these superficial ways don't work. The only thing that's left to make you be heard is meaning, I think.
Oh, also, if everyone can wait till they have a mic, we're going to run them to you, but just don't dive right in. We're going to give you a mic first. So, sorry, who did you just pick?
I chose the girl in the back with the hat.
In the... Okay, we're coming.
It's weird to choose people I don't like.
Hi. One of the things I just wanted to say I love about Charity Water is the 100% of the donation going towards the cause, and like my operational brain is like, but the credit card fees and like all of the back fees and all that being funded by a separate group of people is super like solutions oriented.
Thank you.
But I have 100% sent out that 67% off email and felt like this works. Look at these orders. I got these orders. And now I'm like redefining that. Does working actually mean getting orders, or does working actually mean like creating a long-term relationship and being meaningful?
Yes.
So I'm thinking about that. And so I'm wondering if I'm creating a new kind of copy for, let's just say, even like an email, what would be some of the process or questions you would ask yourself when you're drafting a really great campaign?
I think it's like similar to the story framework, right? Like, how can you find an entry point into your people that's, and not everything is going to resonate with everybody, and that's okay. And not every brand always puts out every piece of content that is meaningful, and that's okay. It's just like the ratio. How are you, like we've sent those emails at Charity Water. That's okay sometimes. It's just if you're always and only sending those kinds of emails, that's when it becomes a problem. But I got an email from Quip, like the toothbrush, recently, and I've had like a fear of taking out my wisdom teeth for years and refused to do it. And they sent me an email that was like a marketing email, but it said, "Let's talk about your wisdom teeth." And I was like, are they reading my mind? What? But that's a cool way to just sort of try and find that entry point. What are people who have teeth thinking about sometimes if we're a toothbrush company? So I think it's just, you don't need a lot. It's just like that little kernel of connection as you're doing an email campaign, because you can't say a lot in email. You can't. So you're confined sometimes to like the 5 words of your subject line or your headline. And making a sentence shorter is a lot harder than saying something in long form, right? So we've struggled with that at Charity Water for years, and like our engineering team hates us because they'll have like an email coded, it's all ready to go, and we're like, wait, this isn't resonating. And everybody's like, oh, okay, what are we gonna say? How are we gonna change it? So I think it's hard. It's not always, there's not like a recipe, but it's just care. I think you just have to care. Yes. Hi. Right there.
Okay, so my question is about partnership with other brands. So when you look at the story model that you laid out, do you think it's most strategic to align yourself with other brands that share the same consumers, offer the same transformation,
and have the same values?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you find is most effective in aligning yourself when you look at partnerships with other brands?
Yeah, I mean, we really fall back on intuition at the end of the day. Like, we have terminated partnerships before going live with them when we feel that the partner, whether it's a suitcase company or a shoe company, doesn't really have the best intentions for the partnership. And for us, it's different because we're Charity Water and we're a nonprofit, so we obviously want to partner with companies who want to play a role in helping us fulfill our mission. But if you're two for-profits, I think you've got to have aligned values, and you don't have to go after the same exact audience. I think it would be really cool if you if you knew that the different audiences shared a single aligned value, then you could speak to a completely different audience and use that value, that sort of core essential truth, as the endpoint.
Okay, that's loud. That concludes our awesome talk with Vic. Thank you, Vic.
Thanks, guys.